Rudy Rochman, G.I. Jew.
I'm a warrior of light.
You're actually Ashkenazi.
Well, in our Jewish education, we were not taught how to be Jews in practice. We're taught how to practice Judaism. And
they won't stop fighting.
How can I show them my narrative through an expression and extension of their own truth?
Welcome back to Ami's House, ladies and gentlemen. Quick shout out to Twillery, Crooked Twillery. We love Twillery. Great brand, great company, very flexible. Rudy, you like that? Great for combat, great for advocacy, super comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, you think you're not going to be one of these. You tell yourself you're not going to be someone who wears joggers, and then you buy Twillery and you become someone who wears joggers.
Dude.
I'm in pajamas.
I think it's become a pajama culture, huh? Right? No one's in... I mean, you're used to
he's in like
he's ready for combat. But all of us, look, it's hard. It's hard. You don't understand. American life is hard. We need to move too. You have to squat down, pick up small, tiny little children.
Yeah.
You're diffusing bombs on the side of the road. Whatever. Same difference.
Get into your comfort.
Volatile no matter what. Yeah.
Twillery's having a cool new promotion specifically for Passover, for Pesach. So stock up on those blazers, pants, joggers, whatever you want. Code Pesach18 for $18 off, $250, or Pesach36 for $36 off. This is eligible for new and returning customers, which is kind of a big deal. So if you've already bought from Twillery, you can go back and get this deal. We'll put the code in the show notes and everything.
Okay.
But thanks.
Perfect timing
Twillery.
for Pesach because you know by those second days of Yontif, you can't fit into those first days Yontif pants. Am I right? You got to be able to squat. Good for hot Pesach traveling in Boca, Miami, Florida, Greece, Mexico, wherever you're going to be. You're going to need Twillery pants.
Or Tanach.
Or Tanach.
Or Israel.
For those who... Okay. That's Twillery. Pick them up now. All right, well, let's get started here in 5, 4, 3. I'm going to give you some theme music to start Rudy to groove. Are you cool?
Yalla.
1, 2, 3. Yalla. Hey! Rudy Rochman in the house! House! You give me some French? Can I get some French? Just some cool French lines? Bonjour. Into
Bonjour.
Here we go.
Comment ça va? Je m'appelle Rudy.
One more time. 3 and.
Comment ça va? Je m'appelle Rudy. 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 Advocate.
Comment ça va? Je m'appelle Rudy. And a soldier. Comment ça va? Je m'appelle Rudy. I love it. Comment ça va? Je m'appelle Rudy. 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 1, 2, 3, and. Comment ça va? Je m'appelle
Rudy.
Rudy Rochman in the house, ladies. It always goes a little long.
That was good,
It always
man.
goes, but that was hot.
That's
See,
good.
totally see that drop. And
Comment ça va? Je m'appelle Rudy.
wow, ladies and gentlemen. How many podcasts start like that? Come on.
First of all, kind
We're cool here at Ami's house. Ladies and gentlemen, a hero of the podcast, Rudy Rochman in the house. Welcome to Ami's house. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so where do we begin? You've come up so many times in our conversations, but
Yeah, well, we were talking pre-October 7th.
yeah.
We were really interested in you because we thought there was no one out there doing it better than you did. You actually seem to persuade people, which is novel. But at the same time, I think pre-October 7th, we were both a little bit like, wasn't everyone just chill? Like, is anti-Semitism really that big of a deal? Do we really need to be like putting it in everyone's faces? And then October 7th happened, and both of my attitude changed a lot. At least Ami's changed a lot.
I was certainly politically the same on Israel. I had always been pretty of a certain persuasion, but the urgency of the anti-Semitism, I think. I was not one of those like paranoid. I'm a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, and I was still like, guys, like there's always like two different versions of that. There's guys who are like, could happen here. We gotta all get out of here. We're not gonna be safe in America. And I was like, don't be so hysterical. And post October 7th, I think we all it was this weird lid that was lifted, and all the anti-Semitism that people was burrowing beneath, or just came out. But I wanted to ask you because you do have this sort of unique thing where, in the world of performative debate. In performative engagement, people are making content out there. There's a lot of people, especially you see in like on the conservative side, where they go out onto the street and engage people, but it's really just to flex their own knowledge and authority of the issues,
Right.
to expose the ignorance of somebody else. And and that's fun. It's candy if you're like on the side of the person challenging the people on the street. And it's certainly fun to see that kind of trolling and stuff. In your case, you're one of the probably the only person out there I've seen take someone who starts here and then they end here. So can you tell us a little bit about like your conscious process of how you approach these things that's different than your typical type of debate content?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people ask me, how do I stay so calm in these conversations? And it's because I'm engaging with this person. I'm realizing it may be the first time that they speak to a Jew. It may also be the last time that they speak to a Jew.
Right.
So my objective here is to try to heal the situation and to correct the situation, not necessarily to expose them and make them look bad. Of course, if they cross the lines and they start insulting the Jewish people and they show their double standard, then they'll expose themselves for what they're doing. But my goal is not necessarily to come at them with an energy of, you're wrong and I'm right. My goal is to find out, how do they see the world, where are their truths, and how can I show them my narrative through an expression and extension of their own truth. And so whenever I communicate to them in that way, they're more open-minded and realizing, wow, there's another way that I can be even more right on my own terms, and it includes the narrative that I'm hearing right now from this person.
So like specifically, I don't know.
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Like, let's say someone is, pro the Palestinians and thinks they need to be against Israel, right? That they think Israel is the person or the people or the country that's doing the bad things to Israel. And if I want to help the Palestinians, I need to be against them. Well, explain to them that there is no reality where Israelis or Palestinians will disappear, right? Or Israelis will be completely wiped off or Palestinians completely wiped off. So any investment of energy where you're creating a zero-sum game narrative of one people versus the other is only creating more fuel for the conflict to continue. Now, you need to criticize the specific things that are happening wrong, but if you're doing it as a way to create as like one versus the other, that is only going to create more conflict and hurt the people that you claim to care about. So I'm more so speaking to their heart and getting to the intentions of what they actually want to achieve.
Right. So it starts with listening.
Yes, of
It
course.
doesn't start
Each
with
person is
speaking.
different, right?
Yeah.
Whenever I'm meeting someone, I don't yet know what they are. So I first ask a lot of questions. Are they someone that's on the right, on the left? Are they religious? Are they secular? Are they Muslim? Are they Jewish? Are they Christian? Are they more on the communist view, capitalist view? So I need to understand a little bit of their background. So whenever I'm communicating to them, I'm using certain words that allows them to hear. Right, I'm not giving a different message. I'm giving the same message. But let's say you're speaking to your mother, your father, your children. Each person is different, and they might have certain traumas from an experience that to avoid those things in order for them to be more open-minded to what you have to say. So oftentimes, before I even get into the conversation, I ask a lot of questions to figure out where exactly is this person and how can I use my communication in order to get them to the place that I'd like to get them to.
You're not afraid to concede certain points that I think a lot of people sort of on the pro-Israel side, like have this sort of model of, I have to stay in this sort of framework and I cannot cede any territory, no pun intended. I cannot cede any territory on talking points or issues or problems that Israel, like shortcomings, lest it like be like a house of cards that falls apart. I feel like for them and a lot of people who've want to engage and make the case for Israel are afraid of acknowledging any problems,
I think also when you provide that nuance, it gives you legitimacy. And, I live in Israel, and there's not one Israeli in Israel that doesn't criticize the government. So criticizing the government is not something new to us, but when you criticize to tear down and you generalize, that's not really criticism. You need to criticize specifically in order to uplift and to say, here's a problem, this is the context behind it, this is how you fix it. And when you do that, all of a sudden to the person in front of you, it's like, okay, this is not just a person that's projecting their narrative and trying to prove me wrong. This is a person who actually cares about changing the world. And so now I'm more open-minded to what they actually have to say.
Well, I imagine you're put in a lot of rooms with people who take a very different approach, like the more performative, debatey approach. Do you find yourself like clashing with them or feeling like you and I aren't doing the same things? Although people bunch us together, we're actually not
like in
quite
the
the same.
space?
Yeah, if you're at a party or on a panel or whatever, do you kind of feel like an island unto yourself?
Well, first of all, I don't even see myself as an advocate. I think advocates are people who support a cause. There are many causes that I support in the world that I would be an advocate for. But for the Jewish people in Israel, I see myself as an activist. So I would say that an advocate is like a fan of a sports team, right? You're supporting, you're maybe sharing a post, and you're in the sidelines and you're cheering them on. But an activist is a player on the field that's actively working to change the game and the outcome of the game. So I see myself as an activist, and I know everyone has different styles, and where I'm good at, maybe someone else is good at somewhere else. So it's completely okay. And I also understand that, look, we were raised with a lot of trauma. We come from a people that have been through a lot. In our Jewish education, we were not taught how to be Jews in practice. We're taught how to practice Judaism, how to put tefillin, how to keep kosher, how to do Shabbat, how to do all these things that are extremely important. But we're not taught how to put Judaism into practice, how to be able to stand up for ourselves, how to have confidence, how to remain calm, how to know all the counter narratives that exist against our people, right? Why don't we know how the far right sees the world, how the far left sees the world, and what they have to say against us, so that when we get into those conversations, we know what to respond, how to create coalitions, how to break coalitions. So I understand that a lot of people are coming from a place that they were not given those tools, and so they're doing what they can with what they can.
Do you is there a line you draw between a person who is engageable versus not engageable, in terms of like a kidnap poster ripped down person who's tearing down that stuff? I mean, there's a lot of these people, I think they just, in a way, when you want to get into their heads, like, it's kind of easy. If they genuinely believe Israel's the Nazi regime, if they genuinely believe that, and that everything in support of Israel is just propaganda, they have to tell themselves that. Otherwise, how could one ever live with themselves and rip down a poster of a missing child unless they convince themselves that it's fake? And in that sense, obviously they're abhorrent in what they're doing, but are they still engageable, people like that? Or do you make a line between, like, this person knows better and is just hateful, so I'm just not going to, like, they're not worth engaging, versus somebody who is just so ignorant they're enabling evil?
Well, even when I engage people and there's a camera, even if I'm not convincing the individual, there are hundreds of thousands of people who are going to see this information being spread and how to respond and how to remain confident. So there always is a benefit. And even if you don't convince someone in that very conversation, you could always plant some seeds that with time grows. Oftentimes I get messages from people years later saying, hey, we actually spoke, a few years ago, and you told me these things and I wasn't so open-minded, but something you said made me think of things in a different way. And then I met that person, and then I read this book, and now I realize that I don't have to be against Israel in order to help the Palestinian people. So I do always think that there's a benefit, even for ourselves, right? When I'm engaging people, I'm hearing, wow, that was an argument I've never heard, or that's a narrative that I didn't know how to come up. So maybe let me do some research and realize the background, so the next time I hear this, I can be able to do something strong. So I think there's always a benefit. And like you said, no one is a bad guy in their own narrative, right? They're in their minds the good guy. So they truly think that they're doing the right thing, and you have to connect to where's that right thing coming from. Are they coming from a place where they truly care about Palestinians? If they do, then let me connect to them on that, show them that I'm not their enemy, I'm actually their ally, I'm actually way more pro-Palestinian than you, and let me show you a way that you can be pro-Palestinian that truly helps us move forward.
I mean, yeah, you exist in the presence of people's cognitive dissonant pain. In real time, I see it all the time. That's why they get angry. When a good point is made that actually speaks to them in the moment, because you spoke about people who reach out to you years later, like, it's almost like a wound. You've wounded and severed a connection they've made that's now been exposed as possibly misguided, and that's quite painful psychologically for people.
Yeah,
I see
but I do it from love, so they experience it in a positive way also.
But the people I think who, like, they get to this moment where they don't know what to say because you've spoken to them in a way that's actually connected. I mean, I imagine some people react differently. Some people are, like, maybe emotionally mature enough and psychologically mature enough to say, that's interesting. And some people might get back to you years later like, okay, that took a minute to heal and reconnect in a different way.
I'll give an example of that that happened recently. Let's say if you're speaking today to younger generations, they view the world not through necessarily facts and accomplishments, but through human experiences that make the world a better place. So the story of Israel is not the story of cherry tomatoes, waves, drip irrigation, and all the technology and startup nation that we've advanced in. It's also not the story of 1948, 67, 73 and the facts. It's the story of a 4,000-year-old native civilization from the land of Judea that were physically and forcibly displaced by a Western white imperial nation called the Romans. Even during our displacement, we maintained a constant presence in our homeland. And after thousands of years of extermination, persecution, and oppression, we created the most successful indigenous liberation movement that ever existed, where for the first time in history, a native people decolonized their land, decolonized their tongues, bringing back their native language, and created a model of light and success to all minorities and indigenous peoples throughout the world.
Yeah.
And when you talk about Israel in that language, all of a sudden people are like, wow, I feel good just by hearing you speak. Like, I feel like this is the right cause. So I had conversations with people about Jews being indigenous to Israel. And, sometimes their response is, well, we're all descendants of Africans at some point. So, how could you claim that you connected to Israel? I was like, well, if you want to go all the way back, we're all descendants of a bacteria in the ocean and eventually evolved. However, you wouldn't tell that to a Maori in New Zealand, right? You wouldn't tell that to an Aboriginal in Australia. You wouldn't tell that to a Native American here. You wouldn't delegitimize their connection, their indigenous connection of their collective to a land, because we might descend. Because when cultures are born, it's important, and you would value that and you would fight for it. But when it comes to the Jews, all of a sudden now you need to bring up that example to delegitimize me. So it kind of uses their own worldview and it puts them into a position where they have to be like, yeah, I'm not really being fair, or they double down and then they expose themselves for what they
So
believe.
you're playing both sides, Rudy. No,
I'm realizing
that's like the Sean Connery.
there is only
you're playing both sides.
there is extensions of truths on all sides that I'm trying to connect in a holistic way.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you developed your message? Like we talk a lot about stand-up and about joke telling, and like you start with an idea and you get on stage and you work it until it works and like crowds respond. Like when did you know you had something?
So it evolved with time. So a little bit about my background. I was born in France. All of my grandparents were born.
Comment ça va? Je m'appelle Rudy.
Yeah.
All of my grandparents were born in different countries. All of them were persecuted for being Jews, as the story of many Jews throughout time.
Which countries, by the way? The French.
So on my mom's side, they were born in Morocco and in Algeria.
Yeah.
They were living in a village called Oujda, and in 1948 there was a massacre of the Jewish community as a retaliation to the creation of Israel.
In other words, they were white settlers. I get it. Yeah. Algerians.
Yeah.
According to certain people. But wow. Okay.
Which is just projection of their own internalized hatred.
Wait, so take me back. I'm sorry, I interrupted. There were massacres in those...
So my family fled from those lands and ended up in France. On my father's side, they were born in Poland and Belgium. My grandmother survived the Holocaust in a nunnery, and my grandfather in an attic, and also they, at some point in their lives, made it to France. And so both of my parents were first generation born there. I was second generation, but at age 3, my family moves to Israel. Then age 5, we moved to Miami. And growing up in Miami, you didn't yet have all the New Yorkers that came during COVID. It was Argentinian, Venezuelan, Colombian, Haitian, Jamaican, Cuban, Dominican, and like that's it.
There were plenty of New Yorkers there.
Not like it is now.
No,
now it's the five. Now it's the sixth town.
We're not allowed there.
Now it's the 5 towns and the 6th town in
maybe
Miami.
in Boca.
Boca.
Like, I didn't grow up in Boca.
No, but it was certainly it's the Sephardi Aventura like.
Yeah, it's Latin Jews. You know, like you have the Maccabi games and you have Team
Bailamos,
Mexico, Team
shalom.
Peru.
Yeah.
You have Argentina, you have Venezuela, Colombia. It's like
How's your
that's your
Spanish?
identity. I understand. I mean, it's very similar to French as well.
Right. Okay.
But growing up, I was labeled the French kid. And then when I visit my family in France, I'm the American cousin. And my dad's Ashkenazi, my mom's Sephardi, but my dad wasn't raised with like kippur and kosher in the house because post-Holocaust, my grandparents didn't really want to have that. He was raised as a proud Jew, he was the president of the Jewish Student Union in France, but nothing really spiritual. So he adopted my mom's Sephardic customs when he married my mom. So Baruch Hashem, I was raised fully Sephardic.
I was about to say you just dropped a bombshell on this podcast. You're actually Ashkenazi.
Well, I mean, what is Ashkenazi? It's like a culture that was passed down through an experience. That culture wasn't passed on with my father.
But you had lox before we started. You had a bagel with lox before.
Lox is fine. Something else is not fine, which is gefilte fish.
He's got a massive issue with
I'm at war
gefilte
with
fish.
gefilte fish. Yeah.
I was we asked for bagel orders and you asked for a bagel with cream cheese and lox.
Because
I
that's
was
like
shocked.
a New York thing, you know?
And cumin.
Yeah.
And za'atar. So whatever. But that's fascinating. So like, I mean, listen, how many Sfardis have the last name Ashkenazi? The one Ashkenazi who found his way into a Sephardic culture and became part of the culture. And he's the token Ashkenazi. Like I'm serious. Like that last name is a Sephardi last name.
Yeah.
Okay, so you would basically, your dad's like, I'm eating rice on Pesach.
My dad's like, look, I don't really connect to the spiritual stuff of Judaism, but it's important to you, and so we'll create our house with that. My mom was very traditional, so I was raised only with Sephardic culture. You know, the Ashkenazi culture was never a part of my upbringing. And so going to Jewish day school, rabbis would say, oh, your dad's Ashkenazi, so you have to go to the Ashkenazi minyan. And I have to explain to them, listen, I know that usually it's through the father, but in my situation it's different. And I found myself...
You pay for everything in cash too? Like how did that...
Yeah. I found myself at a young age, whenever I'm asked the question, who are you and where are you from, I'm supposed to give a different answer depending on who's asking the question and where the question is being asked. And that's where the question came into my mind of like, who really am I? Where am I really from? And then after going through my first experience with anti-Semitism at age 7, where I was kicked off of a bus with my mom for being Jewish. My mom was wearing a shirt in Hebrew. Bus driver was a neo-Nazi, sees my mom's shirt and throws my mom off the bus. That made me realize
what was the context? Just kidding.
The context was that we were Jews. But that made me realize that it didn't matter where I was born, grew up, lived in, traveled to, reside in, what passport I have, or my parents or grandparents were born, what I believe in or don't believe in. What mattered was that I was a Jew. And so that kind of started my journey to figuring what that meant for myself and then being able to express it for others. And over time, you know, when I was in middle school already, my dad was taking me to APAC policy conferences. And usually at those policy conferences, there's a bunch of protesters outside from all sorts of walks of life, from the far right to the far left. And I remember being inside one of these conferences, and there was like this politician, I don't remember which one it was, and he says something like, a strong Israel is a strong America. And everyone gets up and claps. And then he says, but a strong America is also strong Israel. And everyone gets up and claps. And I'm like, this guy literally just said the same thing. It's so like, there's no substance here. He's just like speaking to a crowd. And even as like a young kid, I told myself.
And a strong campaign in Alabama is a strong Israel. So please make your contribution. Thank you.
And so I was like, you know what? This is kind of lame. Let me go outside and speak to the protesters. That might be exciting.
How old are you?
I don't know.
7?
My teens. No, I was maybe like 14.
Yeah,
15.
this is the beginning. This is like the moment.
So this is my first time going and engaging.
So you tell your cameraman, come with me.
This was without cameras then.
So you go outside to the protesters.
I go to the protesters.
Let's get
I was
juicy.
like 14, 15-year-old. I'm like, let me hear what they have to say. And all of a sudden I'm hearing arguments and narratives and things that I have never heard before. And I'm asking myself, like, why wasn't I prepared for that? Why don't I know? And so I started to research. And when I would give arguments back, I realized, okay, that doesn't work. This works. Maybe I won't use this line again. And from there, I realized, okay, I need to learn by putting it into practice. And so I started debating a lot of people. I started watching videos of different speakers and thought leaders of the side that are against us. And from there, I realized, okay, this is the narrative of how I can speak my truth, but that is open for all ears, from the right to the left, from any position that comes at it.
So you're a real artist in a way, you're kind of filtering it all through your personal experience and making like a real art out of it.
Well, Levites are supposed to be good with music, but it's not just music, it's also vibrations. And so I use my speak and what I talk through my heart as a Levite to be able to impact the world.
It's your instrument.
So he walked up to these protesters and said,
Comment ça va, je m'appelle Rudy.
That'll be the last time. Such a good vibration. I have 2 questions on that, because it sounds like, in one sense, you're using arguments that I wonder, do you think are arguments that you present to people just a ways of communicating so that they will listen to other arguments, sort of like a means to an end? Because for me, the indigenous argument is interesting in connecting to that narrative. But if I don't buy that narrative, if I don't find that that's the most rational argument, given that I don't necessarily think like every indigenous culture has the right to now take over every other culture that has centuries later developed. To me, there are other arguments, even just in the modern sense, since 48 and on, in the world of history, which is messy and sloppy and all over the place. Even the modern defense of Israel as a modern secular state, to me, is ultimately more, I would say, you could say legitimate, valid, persuasive, in the sense that even if it won't connect to them, because that can be a dangerous slope, if you know what I mean. Like if you go down this route based on these grounds, it could lead to other places that aren't as intellectually or rationally sound to me. But I don't know. Are you doing it? Are you making that case so that you can bring people in to communicate, or do you actually hold to those arguments?
Or both.
Yeah.
I do hold to those arguments. And if you look at it, there's 2 ways to claim ownership of land. Either you are the indigenous people, the original population, or you are the current conqueror in power. Like let's say the land of Tibet. The Tibetans would say, no, this is our land. We need to achieve our liberation. And then Chinese would say, well, it used to be, but now we took it over, so now it's ours. And for me, I don't connect to we've taken it over, so now it's ours, because people have taken our lands, and just because they took it over, that doesn't make it legitimate.
What if a Canaanite showed up and said, hey?
Funny you mentioned Canaanites, because Canaanites are only mentioned in the Torah. There's no actual evidence that they ever existed. The only evidence that existed is actually a tablet that was found in Egypt that mentions the word Canaanites, doesn't say who they were, where they lived, when they lived. So anyone sourcing the Canaanites are sourcing the Torah. Right? Because the fact that they lived in this land, only the Torah says that they lived in this land. Now, let's go into say who the Canaanites were. Before the Canaanites entered the land, you had the land of the Ivrim, the Hebrews, right? You had Ever, the descendants of Ever or the Ivrim, and then the Canaanites come and take the land of the Hebrews, kicking out many of the Hebrews, which is why Abraham was born in the diaspora, because he's a descendant of Hebrews that were kicked out of their lands by the Canaanites. And when Abraham comes back to his land, he's coming back to the land of his ancestors. So the Canaanites actually had invaded and taken over the land of the Hebrews.
Where is that discussed?
If you look at the line of where Canaanites come from, they descend from Ham.
So is that like a midrash, or do you know what the source?
When it talks about the line of after Noach, right? You have Shem and descendant of Shem. You have Ever, and Ever lived in the land of Israel, and you have Ham, and the descendant of Ham is Canaan, and they were living in Africa, and they poured in, and all of a sudden the Hebrews are kicked out. And so Abraham is born in the diaspora from being kicked out, from the Canaanites coming in and taking the land. So anyone who sources the Canaanites, it's like, yeah, you heard about this, but you didn't hear about the story before they got there, right? Which is a story of them taking the land from us.
Yeah, I mean, like the thing, I keep hearing Douglas Murray's voice in my head of like, we could play this game all day, like going back hundreds of thousands of years and who has claim to what. And in the modern context, like a property right, a legitimate right to a country, can also just be stemmed from the fact that Israel pretty much built itself. Like Tel Aviv, none of this existed before. We're talking about a lot of barren land. We're talking about a lot of absentee landlords. We're talking about purchases in which no Arabs would discuss selling to Jews. But it did happen. And to me, in the most like sort of logical way, it's like to the logical, reasonable person, it's like Israel built itself.
Well, we have both. That's the good thing, and the truth is on our side, which is why it's so easy for me to win arguments. Is because I'm not siding with the side that's not true. But in addition to that, if let's say an example was that when England took over the land, British mandate in Palestine, let's say they actually created a country there. Yeah. And that there was a new country of foreigners, Europeans that had developed. Would we make the argument, okay, now we have no more legitimacy to come back to our land because a new country exists?
It's UK now or something.
We wouldn't be okay with that. So I think what we need to do is to say, okay, if the situation was reversed in any way and we were in the opposing side, what is a narrative that is morally right no matter what position it stands? Right. And that for me is the fact that we are the indigenous peoples. Now, we've always maintained a constant presence of the land. There was never a country built on top of that land like other indigenous peoples in other lands. So we have different situations. And for us, we came back to that land and we revived it because this is where we come from and where we belong.
And what do you think when you come up against challenges to not just that claim, but in general, like the pro-Palestinian narrative that you're up against? What has been the most difficult or the most challenging or most persuasive on not the War of Independence, but on the Nakba side of things? Everyone talking about what this is as that narrative. Like, you can't just tell people your own narrative. It's not going to work. What has come up that you're like, that's given you pause to reflect and refine?
Well, whenever I heard about the Nakba, I always heard it as this is a counter to our independence and to try to delegitimize. And I think that there are a lot of people who use the term Nakba in that sense. But at the same time, I have to be also open-minded that there were a lot of people that were displaced in 1948. Now, we obviously know that the majority of them were displaced because the Arab armies told them to leave, and this was like a warning in order to leave before war. But there were also communities that were displaced by Israel. Now, all those communities that were displaced were communities that were siding with the Arab armies, with Jordan, with Egypt, and were using their towns and their cities as an outpost to go and kill Jews. So in an all-out war where Jews are being killed, especially after what we had just come through, it would make sense why those cities in the context of war would be removed, because any city or town of Palestinians that didn't attack the Jews still exists. Now, does it mean that I'm okay with the fact that people were displaced? No, I think it's an incredible injustice of what happened. There were Jews that were displaced and Palestinians, but I understand that there was an experience of injustice, not because of Israel, but because of the context of war that you experience. And I have to be able to talk about that as well to create a more holistic version of the truth.
You
and
just attribute that injustice, obviously, to what we're talking about, which is the aggression against Israel by the Arab armies. But you still acknowledge the injustice.
Because it's a true experience. Right. It's not fake. And I'm kind of, they use truth in order to weaponize it and use it as like an attack. And I'm taking the truth and healing it and freeing it from the intention of using it wrong. And I think there's something in the Torah that really helps us understand the situation. There's the story of Ishmael and Yitzhak, right? So Abraham is the great Abraham, the leader of his tribe, and Abraham needs to have a son, and Sarah, his wife, is not having children, so they take on Hagar, and Ishmael is born. Now, Ishmael being raised is the prodigy. He's the next one in line. He's the prince. You're going to be the one who's going to take over Avram's role. And out of nowhere, a miracle happens. And Sarah gives birth. And all of a sudden, Ishmael is on the side. All the attention goes on to Yitzhak. And obviously that developed a form of jealousy for Ishmael. And then Ishmael starts to be a bad influence onto Yitzhak. Sarah catches up to this and says, I'm not having it. He's got to go. And so all of a sudden, Ishmael and Hagar, his mother, gets kicked out to the wilderness. Now imagine what that does to a child, right? I was the next one in line, honorable, you're the future. And all of a sudden, I'm in the wilderness with no water and food in the desert. Go from one extreme to the next. Now, a child that's a teenager might not be as mature to understanding the situation. Ishmael looks at it as the source of all my problems, what changed me from a good life to a bad life, is Yitzhak being born. So Yitzhak is the one who stole everything from me, and that developed hatred and rage, and he became spiteful and swearing that he would one day kill his brother. And what we see with the parallels is Yitzhak is born, Ishmael is kicked out. But Yitzhak didn't want Ishmael to be kicked out. He was just born. It wasn't his choice. Israel is born. Palestinians get kicked out. Now, it wasn't Israel's choice or intention to have Palestinians kicked out, but as a nature of everything that happened overall, all of a sudden this injustice happens. Now, how eventually does Ishmael and Yitzhak fix their relationship? Well, Yitzhak, after Sarah dies, he sees his father mourning the loss of Sarah and realizing he needs someone to be there with him. He needs someone by his side. And Ishmael, although his mother had just died and she didn't really like Hagar, and right when your mother dies, you're going to make this suggestion, he goes to his father and says, you need to bring Hagal back. And Hagal comes back, does tshuva, comes back with a different name. But when Ishmael sees this and say, wait a minute, the person that I thought created all of my pain and struggle is now the one correcting it. The person that I thought took away my honor is now the one bringing it back. I must not really know who my brother is. And now that he's more mature, he realizes, wait a minute, he was just a baby when I was kicked out. It wasn't really ever his choice. And because Yitzhak was responsible for fixing the problems that Ishmael was facing, although he didn't cause them, that freed Ishmael from his mindset, from the prison within his mind. And eventually Ishmael is able to do tshuva. And when Avraham dies, they unite together and are pushing forward to fulfill the role. So I think when we look at the situation, we didn't create the problems of the Palestinians, but we do have the power to be able to solve them.
Are we going to be tested on it, by the way? I just want to make sure that was
Well, that's
amazing.
beautiful, yeah, because Israel was a baby when it happened, but and they're being treated as if they were a 75-year-old nation in 1948 with all the power and resources they have now, and made a decision to expel the Arabs.
Right.
But they weren't. They were a fledgling country. They didn't even know if they were going to exist in another few months. But now that they do have the power, they have to change the way they think about themselves.
Yeah, we talk about tikkun olam and ol hagoyim, to heal the world and empower all nations. Well, how about we do tikkun babayit im habnei dodim? Why don't we heal our own home with our own cousins before we even imagine that we need to do the world? So I think Israel needs to play more of a active role of changing the scenario. Even though we're not blamed for its creation, we are responsible for its solution.
Interesting. Here's the fundamental question, because here's where I think the debate is, and you have a unique perspective on this. Is the conflict fundamentally ideological or geopolitical? In other words, you just gave this story which outlines to me an ideological, from its roots, biblical conflict that has its roots in ideology. But you've also spoken about how it's actually a product of white settler British colonialism that has pitted Arabs against Jews to create this instability. So if you could talk about that take on it and how that squares with what you just outlined, which to me, I more agree with that. I think a lot of the hostility, at least towards the Jews, towards Israel in the Arab and Muslim world and the Palestinian world, is an ideological one. The idea of Yahud, the idea of this prosperous Jewish state in the middle of what should be a Muslim land, is the offense. That is why they want to, I feel like when the terrorist on October 7th called his parents, he didn't say, Mom, Dad, I just stopped the British colonialist extension. Mom, Dad, I just got our house back. He said, Mom, I killed 10 Jews. It feels rooted in a very deep spiritual resistance towards Jews.
Right. So I think what Hamas is the extreme version of Ishmael pre the tikkun of Yitzhak that is able for him to heal and do tshuva. And so what we look in Ishmael, the way he's described his relationship towards Yitzhak, is he blames Yitzhak for all of his problems. Right, Hamas blames Israel for all their problems, and he hates him and wants to kill him and thinks the only way for him to go back to what was is by killing him, which is exactly the Hamas ideology. And I think it's actually a big mistake to equate Hamas to Amalek, because although Hamas is the enemy we're experiencing now, so because we're experiencing and we know there's this word called Amalek that is like the enemy of enemies, we've had many enemies throughout time. Right, Egyptians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Moabites, Romans, Greeks, enemies that were horrible.
Philistines.
They were not all Amalek, right? Amalek, right? Amalek is
not connected, by the way. Don't make a mistake.
Well, there is a storyline that's connected. Look,
Rudy's got new takes on everything.
The Torah is what gives us these micro examples of what macro reality we're experiencing, right? It's giving us stories that we can understand that then repeats in our lifetime that we can process and understand how to overcome. But the point is that Amalek is a nation that hates us not for who we're not, but for who we are. Amalek looks at the Jewish people and says, the Jewish people are brought here to bring spirituality to this world, and we're here to fight them against it. One of the characteristics that talks about how you can recognize Amalek is Amalek will be against circumcision, your brit that you have with Hashem. And what we look with Hitler was against circumcision. Hitler said in his book that the Jews were brought to bring consciousness to the world, and I was brought to remove it. Hitler found out where potentially the Bnei Moshe were and sent out Nazis to go and kill them. That's Amalek.
Do they worship Molech? Is that like the connection, Amalek and Molech, or is that completely different?
That I'm not
just
familiar.
I don't know.
Like the one of gods that was given human sacrifices to, Molech. Is that Amalek related?
I'm not sure.
All right, don't mean to dodge it. Don't mean to whatever. So anyway, that Hitler's more in line with Amalek, you're saying?
Well, Hitler is Amalek. It's like there are many nations who hate us.
Definitively.
But usually they hate us for who we're not. Like we're being blamed for the economic situation in Europe leading to the Holocaust. We're being blamed for COVID. We're being blamed for the Black Plague. And we know we didn't do this. So usually nations that hate us for who we're not
is not an expression of Amalek. Amalek hates us for who we are. And if we look at Hamas, Hamas is not against us bringing spirituality to the world, us being connected to Hashem, us keeping kosher, us doing spirituality. So it's not really Amalek, it's the extreme version of Ishmael, and there is a way to end it. Now, I don't think that this is like a storyline that continues. I think it's a storyline that kind of repeats itself. And so obviously Ishmael is not literally today the Palestinians, but that storyline allows us to understand how to deal with it. And I do think that it's, you mentioned geopolitical. I think that the British are the ones who instilled this idea in our minds that we needed to be against one another. Now, if you look at what the British did, after, when the Jews, even then when the Jews were being killed, they appointed Hajimin al-Husseini.
What year was this?
Before even 48. They appointed this individual as the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who met several times with Hitler and had the intentions of telling Hitler, when you finish with the Jews here in Europe, you come and kill the Jews in the rest of the world and in the Middle East. The British appoint this individual as the leader and spokesperson of the Palestinians. Now, it's strange because the British are also enemies with the Nazis, and this guy was very pro the Nazis, so why would you appoint this individual? And this individual does not represent the voice of the Palestinians, so why would you prop him up? And the reason is because they wanted the Jews to experience the Palestinian voice as wanting to kill all of us. Now, how did they convince the Arab world and the Palestinian world that who we are is something negative and wrong? Well, if you ask most Palestinians or most Arabs that are very against the idea of Zionism, of Jews returning back, they'll always say Zionism is a colonial project. It's an extension of European colonialism. And the reason why I'm going to prove to you that it is, the reason why I think that this is true, is because of the Balfour Declaration. Interesting. So they're always sourcing the Balfour Declaration as what made them think this and the proof of why it is true. Now, if we look at the Balfour Declaration that was written in the early 1900s, England didn't even have control over this piece of land called Israel, and at the time, the territory of Palestine, Ottoman. Right? It was under the Ottomans. So the Balfour Declaration is literally a paragraph saying that our intention is to create a Jewish state on this land, which you don't even have. Now, let's fast forward a few years later when there's a Holocaust happening, when the Germans are fighting the British, when the Germans are also killing the Jews. You would think enemy of my enemy is my friend. And there are Jews who are leaving Europe in order to go back to their land. And what are the British doing? They're sending all the ships right back to Europe to be killed in the gas chambers. So if it was the intention of the British to actually create the Jewish state, why, when we have even the mutual enemy, would you not allow us to come back to that country? Also, after the Holocaust, they were preventing Jews from coming back to the white papers and putting Jews in detainment camps in Cyprus and in Mauritius Island. So why in all the actions of the British are they doing everything to prevent creating a Jewish state? Is because the British never wanted to. They wanted to control the Suez Canal. They wanted to control a piece of land that it was in between Africa, Europe, and Asia, and they wanted to basically benefit from this colonial project that they had.
So post-World War I, when they took it from the Ottomans under British mandate, Palestine, you're saying that they weren't allowing Jews to come and settle, and
they weren't. If you look up the white papers post the Holocaust, if you look at how during the Holocaust, every time Jews were trying to come, they were sending them back to the Nazis.
Whoa.
What we look in their actual actions, it's everything but what the Balfour Declaration writes. So why would they write this? And in my opinion, the reason why they wrote this is in order to give the idea of Zionism to the Arab world, that this was actually an extension of European colonialism, convincing both sides that we're actually enemies of each other. And that's exactly what the British did everywhere in the world. If you look at India, Pakistan, still fighting each other due to the British, Afghanistan, Nigeria, all countries they colonized.
What does that accomplish? Why are the British interested in the two populations fighting?
Because that's how you maintain control. That's how you control a territory and keep colonizing it. The local peoples won't be able to fight you if they're fighting each other. And so that's a scenario that they created. And then the Jews terrorized them until they left, right? They blew up the King David Hotel. They were attacking British soldiers. And eventually, at the end of the day, the British were like, okay, this is our gains from being here, but this is our losses. So we got to leave. And so the British leave, and
they won't stop fighting. Yeah,
and what remained?
Peel Commission. These people are just going after each other. I can't control them. Let's go home.
And so
poppycock.
Unfortunately, what remained was this ideology that they instilled in both populations. And because of that, we're still living with that reality of the consequences of that mindset, that because of it, we've had several wars and we've never decided to, hey, maybe we can actually create something here that works for both peoples.
But it's there's two different sources. So the Ishmael source of the modern manifestation of Ishmael resenting Isaac, and that's the tension, the replacement of like displacement.
All right.
That's one source.
That's the lessons to be able to understand how to change the situation.
I get that, but I'm just saying the source of the animosity is twofold, no? Or they were playing off of that resentment. I'm saying like that ideological issue with Israel, the conflict being ideological versus being a white settler colonialist extension of Britain. that created the people fighting each other, which is like a political thing.
Mhm.
So which one do you think
I
is
think the Torah is the let's say you have the front end website.
Mhm.
The Torah is giving us the codes behind the website that allows us to understand how this.
You're saying
is
the means to heal it will be ideological,
Yes,
which I understand.
yes.
But
Well, let's speak about the Quran, because you mentioned
Yeah.
things that say that Jews should be killed,
yeah,
and that's actually in the Hadith, not in the
Yeah.
Quran, when it says that behind the tree
What's
and
the
the stones.
hadith?
It's like
Hadith
the
is
Gemara.
like it's like the Gemara, Talmud, like imams and sages that are arguing with each other about
Mhm.
what the Quran really meant,
Yeah.
right? And in the Hadith, there are things that says, the Jew will be hiding behind the tree and the stone, and the tree and the stone will say, "Here, there's a Jew, come and kill him."
yeah,
Right? That's not the Quran, and there's actually many Muslims who disagree with this portion of the Hadith. But if we take the Quran itself, there are many times that it talks very negatively of the Jewish people,
Mhm.
and there are also many times that it talks very positively of the Jewish people. So how come sometimes it's positive and sometimes it's negative? What's interesting is every single time that it's positive, we're called Bani Israel, and every time it's negative, we're called Yehud. Now, whenever we're called Bani Israel, it's always there's a specific character of the Jewish people that's why we're called Bani Israel. And that character is that we are empowered, we're united as all of us, we're fulfilling the mission that Hashem sent us, we're on our mission and direction. And whenever we're this kind of character, this level as the Jewish people, we're called Bani Israel, and we must be protected, respected, even sometimes followed and agreed with. And
we're not dhimmi.
no, here we're actually a fellow Muslim.
Uh,
Right, because if you look in Islam, a Muslim is someone who accepts Muhammad, which is why Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Moshe, King David, King Solomon are all Muslims, right? They didn't accept the message of Muhammad, but they accepted the message of Musa, of Moshe, and through that are accepting the message of Allah. So even when we're Bani Israel, we're actually not seen as non-Muslims. We're actually respected as Muslims, but the follower of our own prophet.
Even not accepting Muhammad, you're considered Muslim by other Muslims?
Well, every single prophet of the Jewish people that didn't
They
accept
consider-
Muhammad are Muslim.
right.
Yeah.
It means to submit, a submission to God.
We submit to
Yeah,
Hashem
yeah.
through our prophet, right?
But the
You-
only thing that's okay. Yeah,
Look, today, if you would go in pop culture and say what's a Muslim, they would say someone who accepts the Quran and Muhammad.
yeah.
But in the definition of Islam, someone who accepts Hashem is a Muslim,
Mhm.
right? And all the Jewish leaders and the Jewish people are considered
Michael could
Muslim.
pass.
Yeah.
Look at him.
Wait. The point is that whenever we're talked in the negative, which means people that are divided and assimilating and accepting idolatry, now we're considered Yehud. And so within the Quran, there's a code that the Muslim world, whenever we are who we are, they will respect us. And whenever we go away from who we are, they will reject us.
So interesting. And how that plays out and manifests in real life in policy is that Israel, the stronger it asserts itself, the more respect it would command
Stronger,
from the-
but also the more real it becomes. Like right now, we don't really have a Jewish state in its essence, right? We have like a Western state that's trying to be like every other state, and there's some like Maggid Davids and some Hebrew writing that gives it like a Jewish flavor, but it's not really in its core something that's Jewish, right? There's the example you gave, you were talking about like Plishtim, right? Which is interesting that the name of the Palestinians is Plishtim, although they're not descendants of this pre-Greek population that came from Crete. The Plishtim were a population from Crete that were sort of the Vikings of the Mediterranean. And this population was huge enemies of Israel. You have the story of Samson and Delilah. Delilah was Plishtim. You have the story of David and Goliath. Goliath was actually a
She was
Moabite.
probably hot. I always picture her hot.
was
Delilah?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
That
yeah, I mean,
name?
that's why that's why Shimshon fell.
Yeah.
But
And Shimshon was
The love
not
of a
bad
g-
looking either.
The love of a good woman will do that to you. Yeah. Yeah. So,
and so even David and Goliath is actually a Moabite individual, but a general in the Plishtim army. And the Plishtim, in its
cool.
literal
Forgot about
definition,
this stuff, yeah.
is an invader, right? Plishtim in Hebrew, polesh means to invade. Plishtim means invaders. So it's not a coincidence that you have the same population that lives in the same land. The Plishtim were living in Gaza, and all of a sudden the Plishtim were a problem right when we have our first king, right? Melech Shaul, all of a sudden the Plishtim become a problem in the land of Gaza. Israel's created, all of a sudden we have Palestinians in Gaza that become a problem. So again, there's like a theme here that is repeated. Now, what eventually creates a solution with the Plishtim? There's actually never a war that ends the conflict or that destroys them. They actually just they stop being mentioned in the Torah. And the moment they stop being mentioned is the moment that Melech David becomes king. And it shows that when we had our first king, Melech Shaul, we had a king for the wrong reasons. We had a king because all other nations have a king, And we want to be like all the other nations, so that's why we want a king. So Melech Shaul was actually great for the economy, for the military, for the infrastructure, but the country was divided. People weren't happy because he wasn't fulfilling the purpose for why we have a vessel called the land of Israel. Only when the nation evolves to saying, okay, we don't want a king for the wrong reasons. We want a king to actually be able to tap into what we want. That's when we deserve Melech David. And the moment that Melech David is king, the Plishtim problem are just no more. And so what we look at it today is, again, the Plishtim become a problem when right now, I think in the past 75 years of Israel, we've been living in Malchut Shaul, not necessarily an individual king. Again, it's a micro example to talk about more macro concept. It's this idea that we want to have a state just to be like everyone else. And at some point, our nation needs to evolve into, no, we didn't just come back to Israel to have a safe place and to have a state like everyone else. We came back here to fulfill a mission. There is a purpose of why we're here. And I think when Am Yisrael evolves to that, then we will deserve a better leader. Then we will see a different time, which is a Malchut David time, not necessarily a king, but the example of that kind of mindset with our country. And once we do that, I think that also will solve the problem with the Plishtim or today's Palestinians, even though they're not descendants of each other.
Comment ça va? Je m'appelle Rudy.
That was awesome, man. I love that.
I love that, but I'm
By the way,
curious.
that's Rav Kook, you know.
That's Rav Kook. Does that mean that you're advocating essentially for Israel becoming more of a religious state, or having an element of theocracy to it? Because one of the points that I make, and a lot of people make in defense of Israel, is that it is tolerant, Western, and it has these values that are superior in the sense that it tolerates and protects its minority populations, and as opposed to the world around it and the neighborhood that it's in, it stands alone in being this bastion of liberal democracy. Are you saying that's a liability for Israel? That's a shortcoming of Israel? I mean, it could get real spicy here, but
I think there's a lot of problems with Western mentalities. I think that they haven't really been that great to its minority population throughout time, and there's still issues today. I think it's a society that focuses too much on the material, and there are many issues, but we're not Western. We are Middle Eastern, and we are our own people. We don't need to copy any models. Now, I don't look at our spiritual...
free speech, like
for sure,
these kind of liberal values.
If you look at Melech David, he was the most just king. In fact, if you speak to most Muslims and you tell them, I want to build a reality in this land like Melech Daoud, right? Like Melech David, for them it's like, oh, if that existed, I'm okay.
So
with
what
it.
does that look like?
Is
That's
that-
not Israel right now. I'm just curious. What?
Yeah. No, and that's so hard to believe. I mean, I love the story. It's so hard to believe that
They'd be cool with that.
a Muslim would be like, oh,
But like,
as long as you guys are yourselves, I'm cool.
When they learn about Melech Daoud in the Quran, he's obviously a very
Revered.
strong Jewish king, David.
And he's revered. He's
Yeah,
revered.
he's respected, but he's also so just that everyone is like, wow, this is like the ideal situation. And so it doesn't mean that because you are more connected and in tune with your own culture and live your truth that you have to go against another population. These ideas are not mutually exclusive.
Sure, but what
So-
does Israel look like
Yeah.
in the Melech David way?
Well, it's tapped into its purpose. Its goal is to bring light to this world, to be used as a vessel to fix problems.
If I can step in for a second, not necessarily governmentally, but culturally, we're there.
I guess that's my question. Are we
Yeah.
talking governmentally? Are we talking culturally?
Well,
like,
it
how does this implement?
It starts with a culture, and then one of the parts of how culture affects different parts of society is also through the government. We need to understand and ask ourselves even the question, like, what does it mean to have a Jewish state? And I don't see Judaism as a religion, right? Because the word religion is the belief system in a God, deity, book, or a prophet. So if one doesn't believe in the God, deity, book, or prophet, they're not a part of a religion. Hence, a Christian that doesn't believe in Jesus is not a Christian. A Muslim that doesn't believe in Muhammad is not a Muslim. A Buddhist that doesn't identify with Buddha is not a Buddhist. Be it a Jew that doesn't believe in Hashem is still a Jew.
Yeah.
Right? And in order to become a Christian or a Muslim or a Buddhist, you need to, in 1 second, say, I identify with this, and that's it. You become it. So really, a religion is a wandering ideology that crosses over borders of the nation that one is a part of if in the moment they believe in it or not. And that's not Judaism. Judaism is a sort of portable suitcase that we created when we were smashed and kicked out of our lands in order to preserve our identity, way of life, culture, spirituality, identity, purpose, everything else. We pass this down ledor vador, generation to generation, with the aspiration of Shana Bab Yerushalayim. One day we will come back home and revive this civilization. So if you look at many indigenous peoples throughout the world, they all have spirituality, right? Native Americans have spirituality, have like, let's say, moon gods and wolf gods. And you look at Aboriginal, they have spirituality, Maoris. And if an individual from this community doesn't believe in their spirituality, they're still a part of that indigenous peoples, and none of them are calling that a religion. So I think the Western mindset of saying if you are in tune with your spirituality and culture, it must mean like you're imposing this religion. It's like, no, we're just being true versions of ourselves and what our society has been brought to do. And there is a space for people that are non-Jews. Throughout Jewish history, even when we had kings, there were non-Jews living in the land, as long as they respect the 7 laws of Noach, which are very basic laws of, do not kill, do not steal, and so on.
Don't eat that leg if the animal's still alive.
Which is an interesting one. And then all of a sudden during COVID, we understand why that exists. But,
Wet markets you're talking about?
Well, no, well, they said that COVID started from like eating a live bat.
Right.
And so you can see that,
China. But, Israel's pretty Jewish, man, It's pretty Jewish
Well,
by
it means
comparison.
what do we define? Like, there are many Jews living in Israel.
Yeah, but there's a lot of things.
Like on the outside. On the inside, I feel
kosher,
like we haven't
kosher food court at the mall is pretty great.
Right, so it's outside. But on the inside, we haven't yet tapped in.
And what
I think,
they
to our
even say
potential.
if you define Mashiach or Messiah as the Jews accepting who they are and ushering in like a new era, they say that Judaism itself will change. Like a lot of the laws will no longer be practiced. A lot of the holidays will no longer be practiced.
Really?
Because like you're saying,
Purim will be.
it's only Purim because
Only Purim, right?
Right.
That'd be nice, dude.
because we no longer need that suitcase in the way he's saying. We've reached the goal and now we need something new.
I guess I'm trying to square this idea of what you're talking about with the idea of like, if you break Shabbos, you get the Beis Din will legislate from a religious perspective and impose a certain religious legal structure on everybody. And I feel like one of the best arguments for Israel that I make often is like to appeal to people who don't feel religiously connected or don't see the religious, spiritual nation state component of it, which I do on a personal note.
Right.
But I'm saying when you're trying to appeal, like you saying, and using different means to connect with people, it's like, I'm shocked by the level of Western hostility to Israel for these people who want to free Palestine in the name of liberal values. It's like, what are you fighting for exactly? Because if there's one country in the world that aligns with your values, and I'm talking about free speech and tolerance and protecting minorities and LGBTQ rights and all those kinds of things, that would be Israel. So are you talking? We're not talking about the spelling of that. How do those two ideas square?
Well, let me address that because that's actually one of my more important messages. I think that needs to be heard by the Jewish people. There's a clear irrational rejection of Am Yisrael and the Jewish people that is happening. And I think a lot of people that were part of their own little tribes, right? Their social activist groups, their theater groups, their clubs over here. And they thought this was my family. All of a sudden on October 7th, everyone is getting ejected from those communities and saying, wait a minute. I'm a Jew before everything else. And you guys don't stand with me. I stood up and I marched with you and I fought with you. And all of a sudden I'm being attacked and I don't matter anymore. And so a lot of people are coming to this waking up moment that happened on October 7th. But I think there were many Jews that were awake about this long before.
The great betrayal, sure.
So we look at anti-Semitism, right? It's not a logical movement. I mean, the far right thinks we're the left. The far left thinks we're the right. The capitalist blames us for communism. The communist blames us for capitalism. The neo-Nazis, white supremacists, were enemy number one. The black supremacists, the Farrakhan's, were enemy number one. I mean, we are hated by every single extreme group. All of them disagree on everything, agree on only one thing, and that the Jew is the problem. Even
we
how
unite the world.
Even how they're the problem, they disagree on.
Yeah.
But the fact that we are the problem is something they agree on, which is something fascinating because there is xenophobia for other communities. But usually those who hate black people are extremist white. Usually people who hate women are extremust men.
It's usually a singular reason and a
it's
singular
usually
focus from one group to
an
another.
opposed group that is like the opposite of that own group. But when it comes to the Jewish people, right, it's all extremes come to the conclusion that we're the problem, right? And everything that happens wrong in this world, let's say to the Christians, what's their most painful thing? The death of Jesus. Blame it on the Jews. The Black Plague, we're all dying. Blame it on the Jews. Economic situation in Spain leading to the Inquisition. Economic situation in Germany leading to the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Right? The media is a problem. Blame it on the Jews. COVID's a problem. So we're always being blamed for all problems.
We got blamed for COVID?
Yes.
Really?
Very harshly.
How do we, just quickly, how's that?
How is it?
How did the Jews get blamed for COVID?
You had some
Fauci's actually a chassid?
religious people that were like gathering, and like they're always finding a way.
and also
it's the spread.
Right, the
It's
spread.
these religious communities that are causing a super spread.
But
And
also
then there's some like
the-
white
well, who-
supremacists who are saying like, look at the companies behind it. Some of them are Jewish owners.
the Illuminati.
It's always
Bill
Jewish
Gates
in
thing.
power. That stems from the sort of hard right center part, like the Jewish globalist power controlling
right.
pharmaceuticals. Sorry for all those cures for cancer, people. Yeah.
So when we look at it as Jews, we know that we didn't create all these problems, right? As insiders, we know we didn't kill Jesus, we didn't create COVID, we didn't create all those problems.
We
So
did one thing wrong. We succeeded.
why are we being experienced as those who create the problems by the extremes? The extremes are usually people who are the most in pain and don't know how to process the pain, and so that's why they go to the extremes. And so usually the answers that Jews give as to why we're hated is jealousy. Right? We tend to be very successful. And so because of that, people are rejecting us. But if you look in other countries that are new and successful, you have Singapore, and no one's hating on Singapore for being so wealthy and successful. If you look at the migrant groups that are the most recent immigrant groups in America that are the most successful, it's Nigerians, Koreans, and Indians. And I don't see protests against Koreans. I don't see student hate groups trying to delegitimize every single element and ounce of a person for Nigerians. I don't see big protests and movements on social media to divest from all sorts of these minority groups. So it's not from a place of jealousy.
Well, in the economic resentment part, there are parallels. Like I've read about, Chinese in Malaysia that succeed against the majority population. Lebanese, I think, in sub-Saharan Africa, and Armenians, people in the trades. On the economic resentment side, it's common amongst a lot of groups in terms of the minority that succeeds and it's resented by minorities that don't succeed and the majorities that feel they're supposed to succeed. But the other stuff it doesn't explain.
So
With Jews,
I'll
you get this other bag of tricks.
I'll agree with you that there is xenophobia that can be sparked from jealousy. But not on the level of what we experience.
Yeah, sure.
Right? You look at New York City, 13% of the population is Jewish, and over 60% of total hate crimes are targeted against Jews. And this is before October 7th, where anti-Semitism is spiked. Right. So although some of these communities might experience jealousy and might be rejected, I mean, there was Asian hate, right? That's something that exists. But you don't have student groups on all campuses going and trying to fight Asians, right? You don't have social media content nonstop going against Israel. And yes, there's a war and there's people suffering, but there's things like in Sudan and in Syria and in Russia and things that are actually committing human rights violations, and nobody cares about that.
Does seem unique.
There is something that's different, and all groups, all hate groups, all extreme groups come to the conclusion that we need to hate the Jews. The second argument people usually give is we other ourselves. We have our own JCCs, we have our own cemeteries, we have our own schools, our own synagogues, but so do the Muslim, and so do Amish. Amish people other themselves, more so than other people in America. No one's going against the Amish and saying, oh, those are the source of the problems. Right. The other example given is that, well, we have like a dual loyalty. Right? Are you loyal really to Israel and to another people? Or are you loyal to America? This was very relevant in France, where you had Jews living in France and Jews living in Germany, and Germany and France were at war. And so Napoleon was basically, are you a French person that has this Jewish religion? Or are you a Jew first that's going to side with other Jews over there? Unfortunately, we gave him the wrong answer, and we said that we're French with the Jewish religion, which is not true. We're Jews first and foremost, and it doesn't mean that we're against your country, but we need to be true with who we are. However, in America, I grew up in Miami, comes FIFA time, comes Olympic times, everyone is representing another country. And no one's going to say, hey, you waved the Argentinian flag, or you waved the Brazilian flag, or you are actually connected to Cuba, and because of that, you are the source of my problems, and I'm going to project hatred onto you. So whenever we take these things that we try to find logical explanations as to why we're experiencing this irrational hate, they don't hold up when you put another community through the same situation, right? It's not 6 million dead. It's not the majority of hate crimes against the minority population. So I'm asking myself this question.
They hate us as a family. It's almost like the Jewish family. It's like no one would say, hey, you're a Rochman. Are you a Rochman first, or are you an American first? It's like, what? Well, obviously.
You're a Jew, you're an Israelite, and you are the cause of all my pain. That's basically what the world is saying.
I'm saying to the dual loyalty claim, it's like no one puts those two things against each other with other people's identities, that everyone has multiple identities.
In fact, they'd be like cautious to not say something like that, to not be offensive. Right. They're like, oh, I'm not going to talk about them being a Muslim and assume that there's something wrong. I'm not going to look at them as black.
Especially in America, where the whole point of being here is to have dual identities and say, like, I don't have to answer that question. I can be myself here.
But for the Jews, it's a problem, right? So I'm asking myself growing up, okay, I know as an insider, we didn't create all these problems in the world that we're being blamed for. So maybe it's not what we're doing. Maybe it's what we're not doing. And so the question becomes, okay, what are we not doing that we are supposed to do? Well, I think in our Jewish education, we're taught how to be good Jews, to, put tefillin, keep kosher, do Shabbat, light the candles, do Pesach, do all these things. Turn on
lights in Englewood, but yeah.
All things that, are also very important to me, but we're not taught that we also have a collective role, right? You can be individual cells, but all those cells need to understand that they all function as a part of an organ. And that organ in itself has its own role, that all the cells are working together. We don't learn about the collective role of Am Yisrael. So what is that role? It's to do tikkun olam and or lagoim. Now, what does tikkun olam mean? Tikkun olam means to heal the world of all problems. Jealousy, hatred, idolatry, economic problems, environmental problems, war, famine, wherever it is. Am Yisrael is supposed to use the land of Israel as a vessel to correct the problems of the world. Now, what is or lagoim? I'm sure you guys have also learned this in Jewish institutions, that we learn about Ola Goyim as being a light to the nations, as being an exemplary people. Let's show by example how we're good, and then the rest of the world will follow. But I think being a light to someone, you're turning on the light in darkness and giving people the ability to see. You're actually freeing them from shekel and giving them emet, freeing them from lies and darkness and giving them truth and light. It's actually allowing other peoples to be free of restrictions for them to tap into their greatest potential. Right, so that's the role of Am Yisrael, to free other nations, for them to be the truest version of themselves, which is great in their own way, and for us to heal the problems of the world. So let's say the world in itself is actually a more micro example, because I think the Torah does a lot of this, and I think it's easier for us to process when we take the macro into the micro. Let's say the world is a body, and every nation has its own function within the human body. One nation can serve the role of 3 organs, 5 organs and functions can be shared by 2. It's not binary. It could be many different things. And every nation chooses its...
The world is non-binary? Is that what you're saying?
Every nation chooses its function, right? And so when we say we're the chosen people, it's not that we were chosen, it's that we chose. We chose this role. Other people can choose it too. But in the meantime, this is what we chose. So what within the human body does tikkun olam, so healing the body on the micro example, and does ol lagoim, empowering other nations, so empowers the rest of the body to fulfill its function. What in the human body does that?
Liver?
Close.
The Jews are the liver? Is that what you're going to say? I was going to say the heart or the mind.
Right, but like if you look at the heart doesn't heal the body.
The
right?
eyes?
The brain doesn't heal the body.
The immune system.
Opa.
I win. But
you
I won.
So
We are the immune system of the world, Mike.
So let's break that
You
down.
said organ, but immune system. Okay,
Right.
so we're the
Organs are functions.
Yeah, there we go.
The liver is the immune system
It's
of
a
the
part
organs.
of, that's why I said close. It's
Of the
a part of
organs.
it.
And yours is shot. I'm just kidding.
White blood cells, so on. You could say that, but
Yeah, yeah.
the immune system's
Don't
role.
go white blood cells. Bring race into it. It'd be
Oh,
just,
and by the way, this is all answering the question of what Israel would look like once the Jews accept their
Yes,
role,
yes,
right?
yes.
That's
It's
where
go-
we're
it's going
getting
into that.
functionally, yes.
Functionally.
So okay, let's break down the immune system. The immune system's role is to heal the body and to empower the other organs to tap into their potential. When the immune system doesn't work, what happens to the body? The body becomes sick. Now, it's not the immune system that created the disease, but it was the immune system's responsibility to prevent it or to heal it. It's not the Jews that are creating the world's problems, but deep down in the subconscious and the neshama of these extremist groups, for some reason they see us as the source of the problem, but it's not because we're the source of the problem. It's because deep down they know we chose the responsibility and have the ability, so we even more so have a responsibility to heal the world. And to give a second analogy, just to make this like crystal clear, and for the viewers,
So
to be able
Hamas
to-
is AIDS, is what you're saying.
I'm saying that no,
Yes.
that's not what I'm saying.
No, Hamas is sick.
Yes,
Hamas
yes,
is
yes.
sick.
Yes,
And it's
that we need to heal,
Yeah.
right? Hamas is an expression of
AIDS is
Palestinian
AIDS.
suffering.
AIDS is AIDS, and Hamas is sick.
Hamas has AIDS.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
So to give a second analogy, just to make this make more sense, right? Let's say you have a flight from New York to Israel, and it's over the Atlantic. There's no place that the flight can land at any moment. Maybe the next landing is going to be in the next 4 hours if they needed to do an emergency landing. And all of a sudden, someone in the economy class is having a heart attack. And the flight attendant's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? This guy's going to die. There's nowhere we can land. Then she remembers, wait a minute. There is a person in first class that is the head cardiologist of the world. His name is Dr. Cohen, and it's a miracle that he's here. Let me go, and Dr. Cohen, he's going to save this guy's life. And she rushes over to Dr. Cohen. She says, Dr. Cohen, this guy's dying. He's having a heart attack. It's a miracle that you're here. The only person who can save him. Dr. Cohen puffs up and gets up and says, not only do I have the ability because I chose to go through so many years of medical school and I chose to be able to work on my craft and be the best cardiologist, but also all the tools that I need. I was supposed to check into my checked luggage, but it was too heavy and I was cheap and I didn't want to pay. So they're actually in my carry-on, and I actually have with me everything that I need to save this guy's life. And Dr. Cohen takes his tools, rushes back over to economy class, opens everything. Everyone's witnessing this. Everyone's watching. Oh my God, this guy's going to die. He's going to perform a miracle. I'm excited to see this person save his life. And Dr. Cohen pulls out all of his tools, is ready to do this miracle that he has the ability, that's the responsibility for. And then he stops. And the guy dies. Now, did Dr. Cohen kill this person? No. But how is everyone else experiencing that? How are the people on the plane that for the first time in their life they saw a dead body? For the first time in their life they saw live a soul coming out of a physical body, which is traumatic for people. all they can think about is how evil Dr. Cohen is and how horrible he is. And if it wasn't for him, he could have saved them, and he didn't do that. And the family
Said,
members.
what's your insurance? No.
He also gave a very long speech before he went to the back. He could have just gone straight to the back.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you, I was going to check my bag and I didn't. And they're like,
He's
Dr. Cohen,
dying.
please. I want to first make one short story to sum up why being here on this plane is from God.
And a quick shout out to Twillery.
Right. So you're saying
but the point is, like, even the family members that are at now the funeral, and they're like, my son couldn't have been here for Shabbat, but now my son died. All they're externalizing their emotion and pain is on Dr. Cohen, right? And no one forced Dr. Cohen to be a doctor. He chose that path. It doesn't make him better either. Like a lot of other people can choose that also, and it doesn't make you a good or bad person because you're a doctor, right? But he chose to give themselves the ability, thus he has the responsibility. And when you don't use that ability in those situations, you will be projected by the rest of the world in their experience as you are the source of the problem. And we are the Dr. Cohen. We chose to have the responsibility and ability to heal the world and to empower other nations. And when we don't do that, I mean, you see an individual Jew good in physics and,
could be a lawyer too, let's be honest.
And good in medicine and good in technology, but we don't do that as a collective. We don't use Israel as a vessel to achieve that. And when you don't do that, we get treated as if we're responsible for all the world's problems. So really, anti-Semitism at its core is a rejection of the Jewish people failing their purpose.
And so then Jews living as Jews in the state of Israel, accepting what they are and not just what they're not, would be a nation that helps the rest of the world heal.
Yes.
And that would then filter into decisions the government makes and leaders that are elected and the social system and welfare and everything within Israel.
Well,
does
there's
that
a lot of
answer your
medical
question?
And then we achieve Mashiach, right? Mashiach is this reality where there's the ecosystem that works, right? There was a break that happened after we left Gan Eden, and we need to fix that break. You know, there was in Yellowstone National Park, there was a moment where they had hunted out all the wolves. I don't know if you're familiar with the story.
They cleared it of wolves, and then they had to repopulate Yellowstone with wolves.
Right, exactly.
See?
So,
Boom.
So to say,
Giggle all you want.
to understand
Dummy.
I thought that was.
They repopulated within a span of
just
a year or
surprised you
something.
know
Let
about
me
it.
explain why
I'm
they were
surprised you know
populated.
about it.
Because there were no more wolves. The bison, the buffalo, started overgrazing because they didn't have to flee from one grassland to the next, and they started overeating to the root of the grass, and then the grass wasn't able to grow anymore, and then there were no more. There was nothing holding the ground together. There was no more life. The insects started dying. The birds started leaving, and all of a sudden, the ecosystem that once was flourishing was tearing itself apart because there was one little piece that was removed. Scientists noticed this, brought back the wolves. The bison started
in the
growing.
90s or something, or late,
Something like that.
They reintroduced a few
Right,
wolves,
right.
and then boom.
And then all of a sudden, the bison are going from one place to the next.
Dr. Zisfield was the head of the research team. I'm just kidding.
The grass
A
comes
Jew.
back, the bugs come back, the birds come back. And so what the Jewish people need to do is to find the missing pieces that has been broken in the ecosystem of this reality we experience, and to bring back the balance of Shamayim V'aretz, of spirituality and physicality. And once we achieve that, then Mashiach is a reality, which can exist already now. We're just mentally disconnected from its presence. And once we reconnect humanity to it, that's when we achieve Mashiach, in my opinion.
So just to button this whole thing up in terms of how it looks going forward for solutions for Israel, because you see a lot of the same old. I'm very tired of the whole, like, we need to discuss the two-state solution and bring it back. It's like, 5-6 times the charm, guys. But how do you see that vision translate into what Israel could look like as a single state, prosperous and connected, bringing the godliness to the world? Like, how does that look going forward, given all these modern day solutions?
Right. So first of all, any solution that has to be implemented is one that must focus on solving the injustices that both populations face and fulfilling the aspirations that both populations have. If you actually break down what Palestinians need and what Israelis need, they don't contradict. And if you break down what we suffer, solving them doesn't contradict either. And a two-state solution does neither for either populations. Palestinians, for the most part, want to live from the river to the sea. Jews, for the most part, want to live from the river to the sea. And there are enough of us on both sides that would fight and die in order to prevent this situation from happening where we're splitting our land. And I think for a lot of Westerners that come from a two-state solution perspective, it's kind of like, okay, you go to one corner, you go to one corner, you can't live together, so you have to separate. But this land is not just a piece of property or territory to buy, sell, and trade. It's our soulmate. It's not something that you can cut up. There's the story of King Solomon, right, where two mothers come to his court and say, we're the mothers of this one baby. And King Solomon doesn't know who the mother is, right? They don't have DNA test. So what does he say? He says, let me cut it in half. You get one half and you get the other. And one mother says, okay, as long as I get half, I'm okay with that. And the other mother says, actually, no, it's not my baby, it's her baby. Let her take the whole thing. And King Solomon is able to see who the real mother is, because the real mother would never cut her baby in half. And if this is truly our land, we will never cut that land in half. Now, how do we create a reality that fulfills the aspirations of both? First of all, I think the political system that we have in Israel is a system that doesn't work. The system for homogeneous thinking, like in Europe, where in England you have, usually same train of thought, but when you have two Jews and at least three opinions, right, it doesn't work. So in the Knesset, you see many different parties, and it's a system that is already focused on division, because you have the left and the right, which the right in Israel champions security, economy, and national identity, and the left champions human rights, social values, poverty, environment, and those things don't contradict one another. Right, they're extensions of one truth that we've positioned as opposing to one another. So we divide the population, and already we have a system that is dividing people. And then we have a system that, because you can have a new election at any moment, because you have so many different parties, and to gain, you have to create a coalition, but that can break at any moment. You're thinking on the short term. Politicians are only thinking, what can I do now that I can get a quick return that I can use in the next election, which might be next week? And we're not thinking long term and in a way of united. So already I don't say one state, because one state implies continuing the current government we have and extending it on the rest of Israel, for which I think the government we have has to change. We have to create something new that's even more democratic, in the sense that people have a relationship with the power, in a sense that's more Jewish, in a sense that's more open to non-Jews living in this land, and something that actually works. But I say one civilization solution, because this is one land that is accessible and must be accessible to all the peoples from the land, including Israelis and Palestinians. Now, when you think of the non-negotiables for Palestinians, for them it's right of return. Right of return for all Palestinians, those living in Jordan, those living in refugee camps in Lebanon and other places, those living in the diaspora and other places. So, when we as Jews first hear the right of return for Palestinians, we're like, wait a minute, you want to bring in millions of people and all of a sudden we don't have the majority, especially when so many of those people don't like us? Like, that's not a possibility.
Sounds suicidal for Israel.
Right. So the reason why Jews reject this idea of a right of return is not because we're against Palestinians being here for the sake of them Palestinians, it's because their coming here would remove something from us. Right. So we're not against their aspirations because of their aspirations. We experience their aspirations as an attack against us because of how it could look like. However, if we were to change the pop culture, if Israel were to realize that, okay, we need to remove Hamas, we need to remove the Palestinian Authority, we need to invest in education, we need to create freedom of speech for Palestinians for different ideas to exist, we need to empower the local leaders, that the true leaders of Palestinians, we need to invest in infrastructure, we need to invest in roads and job opportunities and education, and the relationship of Israel was different than the one that it currently is, you would see a mindset shift within the Palestinian population. But then the question becomes, what about the demographics? Right? Well, there's already several things that we can do. The West Bank, Judea, and Samaria, we can do it into a sort of federation system or a canton system that has checks and balances, that in local places has more local power, less national power, which is actually what Palestinians prefer. Most Palestinians don't like the fact that there's a Palestinian Authority controlling them. They care about the family in their kfal, in their village that controls. You go to most Israelis, they don't know who the mayor of Tel Aviv, of Kfar Saba, Herzliya is. So we care more on the national level, where they care more on the local level. There is a way of creating something, but something that we don't talk about much, unfortunately, in our generation, and B'ezrat Hashem we will soon, is the tribes of Israel. Now, us as Jewish population, we're 15 million Jews.
Let's go there.
And those 15 million are descendants of 2.5 tribes. We're Yehuda, Binyamin, and half of Levi. I'm from Shevet Levi, from both sides of my family, right? And so we have 9.5 other tribes out there that have yet to return to our people. That in the Torah it says that in the times of Mashiach, the tribes of Israel reunite from the four corners of the earth, which is a flipped equation, right? Answer is times of Mashiach equals bring the tribes of Israel from the four corners of the earth, flip it, bring the tribes of Israel from the four corners of the earth, and you get to
I'm not
Mashiach.
good at math, but I hear you.
You get to Mashiach.
Yeah.
And if you bring back this population, right now the descendants of Israel, Zera Israel, or the dispersed of Israel, Nitche Israel, are about 500 million.
Where they at?
Four corners of Earth, Africa, Asia, South America, and we're working on a project to locate them and bring them back to the consciousness of our generation. But the descendants of these communities are 500 million. Not all of them are identifying as Jews like me and you. Just like you go in America and you have 5.4 million Jews and 60 to 80% assimilation rates, not every Jew is identifying as a Jew. And so if you look at those that are, it's about 20% of this population. And over
identify in practice?
Yes,
or?
identify in practice. On different levels, right? Yeah. More religious, less religious.
But there's an 80% that doesn't even know they're Jewish?
Some of them don't know. Some of them know and reject it. Some of them know and don't care. Some of them are like, oh, well, we're something else now, so this is what we are. Just like Jews in America, right? And about 20% relate to it, connect to it, identify as being a part of Am Yisrael, some religious, some not. And half of them want to make Aliyah. That's 50 million people. If you bring back 50 million people
bring them out,
back home, it solves all of our problems.
Where are they specifically? Can you just, sorry, is that what you're going to ask?
Where they're going to live? Is there
room?
Is there room
There's
for
room.
50 million
There's
people?
for sure room in Israel. And actually, I think, this might be like
Sky, man.
a new idea. But
Everyone adds a few bedrooms.
this might be a new idea, but just throwing out there because it's something that is brought up. When you try to really find solutions, if you look at Jordan, right, which is 70 to 80% Palestinian, the Jordanian country is an invention. It's basically you had two families in Arabia that fought each other. Hashemite, and he knows a lot.
Yeah.
Michael thinks we like to play dumb, but
You think you know somebody.
That's
No,
why
no,
it
no.
functions. They have a Hashemite kingdom, and that's why they're able to make sort of
Nachon.
unilateral decisions on peace with Israel.
Right.
Well, Transjordan, you're saying it was Hashemite versus the kingdom of
and
Saud?
Exactly. And so they
Boom!
they fought each other, and the Saudi family won, which eventually became called Saudi Arabia, but the Hashemite family was kicked out, and they had other resources that the British wanted, so they gave 3/5 of the mandate to Palestine, Transjordan, to the Hashemite kingdom. So it's a fake country with a foreign government ruling Palestinians that identify with the rest of
So
Israel.
the same population of Arabs living in Israel in 48 were also in Jordan as a product of
Right.
geography.
And living across and traveling across one.
And it was Transjordan, so it was very progressive at the time.
Nice. And so also,
It identified as Jordan, but it was actually Palestinian. Transjordan. That's clever.
but if you look at also this piece of land is where Jews were living. You had tribes of Israel there as well. It's our indigenous land.
Are there Palestinians that are tribes of Judah here? Is that what
Well,
we're saying?
30 to 60% of Palestinians are actually descendants of Jews.
Oh my goodness.
And
gracious.
what
if
they
you
say.
look at places like Akko, Yafo, Yatta, Haifa, Nazareth,
Yeah.
Bethlehem, Hebron, Shrem, Nablus, Safed, which is
Yellowstone.
Tzfat. 80 to 90% of those Palestinians living in those areas are actually descendants of Jews, even higher amounts in
crazy.
other places. So there is something there to talk about.
yeah.
But the point is that, this piece of land that is today called Jordan is connected to the Palestinians, is connected to the Jews. What if we included that in a future reality? And then there's enough room for everyone.
Extensions. Oh, wow.
Well,
yeah.
it's liberating our land.
It's
We're not trying to
Hashemite
become
love.
something that we're not. We're trying to
But
go
Jordan
back
is
to
not
what we
part
are.
of biblical Israel. Are we?
It is.
It is.
It is.
Yeah, there are different
His-
maps you
his-
could look at.
I wouldn't even say biblical. I would say historical Israel.
Yeah, historical.
This was
a
part
kingdom of
of-
David.
This was part of our civilization.
And
All
over
right, there's room.
and over yeah.
There's room. Good. We
Right?
solved
And
that
I'm
problem.
not saying we should go take lands that we're not connected to
Right.
be able to expand. I'm saying this is a part of the land that Palestinians and Israelis connect to.
Yeah.
We can create a civilization that works on the land that we are.
But it's like
from.
you. I know from your angle, you put a lot of responsibility at the foot of Israel to make this
Of course.
happen.
I mean,
But at the same time, I want to move on to this next. But before we run out of time, there's a whole other area I want to talk about. But how much of it the responsibility also just lies on the Palestinian leadership to change the way they think about Yahud.
their leadership is not really their leadership. It's those who control them. I mean,
Yeah.
Hamas is on its 18th year of its 4-year term.
Right.
Palestinian Authority even more. We allow that to exist. And so if you look at Ishmael that is trapped and plagued by this rage of this trauma that was caused onto him,
Yeah.
Yitzhak doesn't do it to heal him. He does it because he wants his father. But in doing so, he heals the problem of Ishmael, and that unlocks him and frees him. And we
Just-
need to free Palestinians as well from their
But
situation.
you bring a horse to water, can't make him drink. That keeps ringing in my head when you see this effort, which is a beautiful effort and a beautiful vision. But if they don't want it and they just say, no, we just don't want Israel to exist, still, I guess, you're no stranger to defending
But just
them.
like for us, that at our core, we're not against the idea of a right of return because these are Palestinians, but
Right.
because we experience it negatively. At their core, they're not against the idea of Israel. The reason that they become against Israel is they're told the reason why you suffer is because Israel exists, and the way that you can get out of that suffering is by destroying Israel. But if you don't suffer anymore,
People got to stop telling them that.
But they have to start experiencing Israel differently.
Uh-huh.
That's what will change it.
Interesting.
No, it's surprising to hear someone who just got back from fighting in Gaza to speak so positively.
You're no idealist peacenik in the sense.
you were a target of someone who wanted to kill you, and yet you're still able to maintain this vision. It's
Because I understand the difference between the symptoms and the source of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Hamas is a symptom of suffering that they face that we're not to be blamed for, but we are supposed to take the responsibility to fix their situation. And, I've been fighting for this before the war, during the war, after the war. And I understand what the consequences of those wars look like. You know, I have friends that didn't come back from Gaza. And so I realized that right now we need to take on the responsibility to prevent this problem from happening again and for more people dying. And that's why we need to invest our energy in.
No, to hear you say it, I think you can say that with a bit of authority, that someone who's not literally putting their life on the line can say that. It's wonderful to hear you speak like that.
Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, on that, moving just to this final, we'll close here, but on the idea of Rudy the soldier, you know, you talked about Rudy the activist and the work that you've been involved in up until this point, but as a soldier, you have a unique position in that I feel like there's this double front of the war, the propaganda narrative war that you've been in, and you're in combat. You just returned from Gaza recently, and you were releasing videos from the front lines of what it's like. And I feel like there's a lot of Israeli soldiers that, you know, when they're in that mode, they're not necessarily thinking about how this is all being portrayed. You know, they're like, what? Hey, that's what they're doing. We defending, you know, it's okay, whatever. They don't know like this spin, but you are there the whole time also knowing every effort Israel is going to minimize civilian casualties, to do these things in a proper way. And then you also know exactly how it's being spinned. So can you just talk about that? Like how that, like, how you process that and are dealing with it and are conscious of it, and like what are the biggest misconceptions that people just get flat out wrong when it comes to actual military campaign going on in Israel as someone who's on the front lines fighting in Gaza?
So I'm a warrior of light, and that goes in whatever battlefield is in front of me, whether it's an ideological battlefield or a physical battlefield. On October 7th, I was actually with my family. We were supposed to have a family wedding. My cousin was getting married. Like a few days later on Thursday, October 7th happened on a Saturday. And I woke up to my mom showing me images of horrible things that had happened. I got called up maybe an hour later telling me we have to come back. Drove to Jerusalem to my apartment, dropped off the bags that I had taken for the weekend, picked up my army bags, went to the base. They told us to get on our uniforms and our everything, our vests, gave us the guns, and we were sent to Kfar Aza. By 5 p.m. we were in Kfar Aza. We were the unit that took Kfar Aza back from Hamas, fighting them for 2 days. Then we got sent to the north, supposedly supposed to be put into Lebanon, but then that didn't happen. So we then brought back down south, and we went into Khan Yunis, the first unit that went into Khan Yunis, into Gaza. And so, look, if you don't fight anti-Semitism and your enemies, you will die. So you need to fight to survive. But we can also fix the situations that caused us to fight in the beginning. And for me, that's the thing that I criticize Israel the most, is that, yes, we didn't create the problems. We don't hate Palestinians. We didn't intentionally do things to place them into a bad reality. So when the world says that, that's wrong. But the reason they're experiencing us this way is because we do have the power and we have the responsibility to fix it. And so let's tap into that. Let's actually do what we need to do. And obviously when I'm at war, I don't want to be fighting. I don't want to be taking any lives. But if I don't do this, then my people die. So there is no question. I'm not a pacifist.
You got to be the chemo that fights the cancer, but then you got to maintain the health afterwards.
And you know, a lot of people that were following me on the Palestinian side are like, how could you do this? How could you come? I'm like, well, I'm not a referee. Like, I'm on Team Israel. I just don't see you as my enemy. But if Hamas is going to come in and kill my people, we're going to stop them from happening. So I'm not here to be on the middle side. I'm on my side. Right. But I want my side to be able to create a reality where your side and my side don't need to fight each other anymore. So, yeah, it's always in my mind. And as I'm fighting the war, I know I need to fight it in this moment. But the outcome after, when the smoke settles, is we need to create the conditions for such a symptom not to exist again.
But when you come back from a front line and you hear a portrayal, British anchor going, well, Israel's just bombarding, like the language being used, the way it's depicted.
It's not surprising because the world will always see us as the source of the problem.
Sure, I'm just saying, is there something where you're like, having seen it and having to experience certain engagement
obviously
firsthand, that must sting in a different way, having come back from it and then seeing it talked about
it doesn't,
in a way that's so ignorant.
It's so ignorant and it's so false and it's so the opposite of the reality, but it doesn't sting because I understand where it's coming from. I mean, all the things that you hear, apartheid, genocide, ethnic cleansing, colonization, settlements, interesting. That's what the West did to the world, right? The West did apartheids and genocides and ethnic cleansing and settlements and colonization. And today's far left of the West feels so guilty for the crimes of their ancestors that they're ashamed to look in the mirror and they project their white guilt onto the Jewish people. And so I know where it's coming from again, that if we don't play our role as being the source of the solution, we will be experienced as the source of the problem. And so it makes sense to me. In fact, if it wasn't like this, I would be surprised.
Occasionally you'll see footage of people screaming out against Hamas and what they're doing and bringing upon them Israel's retaliation. Do you come across Palestinian civilians when you're there on the front lines that view the IDF in any sort of positive way for fighting Hamas?
So my unit, at least me and the experience that I had, I've seen very little civilians. The first day we went in, all the civilians had been cleared. There were leaflets dropped by the IDF saying in 72 hours the army's coming. All civilians have to evacuate in order for you not to be in the line of fire. Obviously, it was nonstop fire from Hamas popping out from this tunnel and that tunnel, and snipers and RPGs and all sorts of things. And then there was one civilian that we saw. It was like an old lady that had some sort of schizophrenia. You know, when you see like homeless people screaming on the street and like not like she was kind of acting that way. They realized she wasn't a threat. They took her and they brought her to a civilian area. That's the only civilian that I saw, you know, coming in. Later, there was like a individual man who creeped up on one of our positions, and so they took him. They thought that maybe he's a Hamas terrorist, and they found out that he was just trying to like steal some food or get something for aid. And then they realized, okay, we need to release him. He's not a threat. But they asked him a few questions before, my friend who speaks Arabic, and they said, "What's your profession?" He's like, "I'm a teacher of Islam for kids." And he said, "Do you agree with what happened on October 7th? He says, "I tell my students that this is the way of Islam and the most honorable thing we can do." And this doesn't show that all Palestinians are like this, but shows that the people in charge of the education, this is how they indoctrinate their population. My commander, when we got out of Gaza, said, "You know what I noticed? That they're missing a childhood. We didn't see playgrounds. We didn't see soccer fields. We didn't see basketball courts. We didn't see toys. What we saw is book after book." I have 3 suitcases full of Hamas propaganda that teaching them that the most honorable thing you can do is to kill Jews. And it's not just Israeli soldiers. It's not just Israelis. It's Jews all around the world, and that this is how they need to see life. And no one is born thinking that way. This is something that they were trapped to, and we've known that for 18 years. Hamas has been teaching their population that. So we need to free them from that reality and give them a different experience. And of course, I'm contextualizing that also while I'm at war.
How are you on time?
Yeah, I do need to go in a few minutes.
All right, we can wrap up.
I wanted to just quickly, maybe if I have to leave, I have to leave.
Yeah.
But we want to talk, if you have a minute, we want to talk a little bit about like Rudy, the content creator, a little bit, and just like hear about your strategy and approach and your team. Like, I'm just really curious about kind of behind the scenes, what's going on.
For sure. So depending
And
on
if I have to leave, I'll say goodbye in advance.
For sure. So it depends on which project. We're working on a documentary series right now. So that's one of my bigger
mostly
projects.
the like Instagram presence.
Yeah, I mean, I started that in like 2015, not on Instagram, more on Facebook first, because you couldn't have videos that were longer than 2 minutes. And so my goal was to create content that does 2 things. One, that empowers Jews, that gives them the ability to show how you can remain confident and calm, how you can answer to someone who's like a neo-Nazi or someone on the far left, and to give them the tools to be able to be Jews in practice, and to give them something that I wasn't taught, but now that I learned and I can pass that down. And I think people don't read books anymore, watch videos, and when there's like a debate, it's something engaging and you can see it live how it works. It's not just a theory, it's you see it in practice. The second reason is to change how the world sees the Jewish people and how the world sees Israel and how the world understands us. So that was my strategy in creating content. It was to bring light to the world where there's darkness. Never did I think that, would have eventually hundreds of thousands of followers. It was never for the intention of becoming popular or, doing brand deals. Like I get offers all the time of like companies like, "Oh, can you do advertisement here?" And for me, it's like, unless it's something that I connect with, I don't want to do it.
Gary name or whatever.
Or like a friend's thing that, I think is like something truly bringing light, then I'll do it. But my intention was always to bring
Israeli
truth.
brands only.
You know how many sunflower seeds we could sell together, Rudy?
To bring light to darkness. And so I run the social media. I try to respond to as many people as I can, but sometimes it's impossible.
Do you have a team working with you?
Editors and whatnot.
Different teams in different ways. A lot of the times I do my own editing. On the road when I'm traveling, I'll cut it up. But there's a person in my life named Noam Liebman who lives in Jerusalem, and he's kind of been my partner in creating a lot of the content. He's a master filmmaker and videographer, has received many awards, and he's also the director and filmmaker for We Were Never Lost. Cool. And so a lot of times we're working together on creating this.
Right. That's great.
That's good. Yeah.
You're cutting up video
Shout out to
on your
Noam.
you're cutting up video though on your own, just like as posting. Like do you post every single day?
Not every day. I try to post, whenever there's something relevant and as much as I can. Actually, my account's shadow banned currently. Like you can't even find my account if you're not following me.
It's a badge of honor.
And is there Wi-Fi in Gaza? How you upload it?
I didn't. I actually had a kosher phone that I snuck in because there's no GPS and internet. So
yeah, but you were able to upload a little bit, no?
When I got out maybe twice. So when I got out, I would upload, and also between I had created content beforehand that no one was posting while I was in Gaza as well.
Yeah. Wow. Last question, and we're going to wrap up here. The numbers out of Israel, like civilian casualties, because you just said before, and I had to ask this question, that the place was completely clear to civilians for your entire campaign. You maybe came across 2.
Yeah.
So does that mean to say that like all these numbers are completely inflated or misrepresented because they're Hamas figures, that we're not really talking about a lot of civilians here, or is it just a collateral damage product of war?
So I didn't experience all of what happened in Gaza. I think most of when civilians die, it has to do with Air Force strikes and not combat to combat with soldiers. I'm not in the Air Force, so I didn't have those experiences. But what I can say is that the army of Hamas, their militants, their terrorists, was over 30,000, right? And over 10,000 Hamas terrorist soldiers have been killed. And that number is somehow included into the civilian count. And in addition, I think the civilian count is completely taken out of proportion. Are there many civilians that have been killed? Absolutely. Is it horrible that even one civilian is killed? Absolutely. But if we truly want to understand what happened, we have to understand why it happened and the context for that situation, and how Hamas knows it can't win a physical war, has to win an ideological war. So let me place my civilians in areas where I know they're going to die, so I can use then the count of how many people have been killed and say this is because of Israel. And I did experience, I was side by side with a unit that used drones in order to locate Hamas. Many times we saw Hamas terrorists going with like 2-3 children next to them, knowing that IDF wouldn't be able to shoot because there were kids next to them. So there are times where Israel has to shoot. Let's say there's a building shooting rockets at Israel. Like, I'm sorry,
when you hear it firsthand,
you need to stop it. And so they warn the civilians of the building to get out. Listen, like, we have no other choice, but this building is going down. You guys are shooting at us, but we're warning you to leave. And then Hamas forces those civilians to stay there. And then all of a sudden you have civilian casualties and a response. So there are situations that happen in that way, and it's extremely unfortunate we're put into an impossible situation. But all the experiences that I saw is every time there were civilians that were taken, Israel actually didn't engage, knowing that it would lose the potential Hamas terrorists that would then even kill an Israeli soldier because they were not trying to kill civilians.
Well, it's good to get some firsthand. We talk a lot about it in the abstract with all sorts of people on different sides of the issue and a lot of obviously pro-Israel people that I come across. But this has been a really special conversation with Rudy Rochman, G.I. Jew, a hero for us all. Am I the first person to call you that? I want you to carry me across a river. Rudy is lifting us up, all the Jewish people, and we appreciate everything you do on the online space, on the physical front lines, and
fashion too.
Fashion.
You look good, man.
Thank you.
That's just cool.
You look real good.
I'm in dad sweatpants here, joggers, and you're in combat. Looking sharp.
Is
this
a
a
Sudra?
Sudra? You got a Sudra?
Yeah. Is that your company?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's me and a partner.
So when you buy it, the money goes to support you?
Well, it goes to making more Sudras, because the goal is to create a product that brings back this element of our identity that we lost.
Yeah.
We're raised wearing kippot, and a kippah is actually a minimized version of the Sudra.
Wow.
The Sudra is the ancient head covering of the Jewish people, and we lost that because we had to minimize it, hide it under hats to hide our identity, or the Jews that were dhimmis were forced to take it off, and so it's part of our
second-class citizens in Muslim countries called dhimmis, forced to pay the jizya tax.
Yes.
He knows a lot about wolves and
I always wolves, Kingdom of Saud, Hashemites. I always thought the kafiyah looks pretty good. It's cool, and I'm annoyed. Not the What is it? The kafiyah?
Yeah, the kafiyah.
Yeah. So the Sudra, we're bringing it back, baby. Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Rudy Rochman. And remember, don't forget it.
Comment ça va, je m'appelle Rudy. Comment ça va, je m'appelle Rudy.
Bringing back the Sudra, bringing back the vision of Am Yisrael, the Jewish people.
Tribes of Israel.
Comment ça va, je m'appelle Rudy.
Rudy Rochman on Ami's house. Thank you so much. Boom.
Thanks for being here, man. Thank you very much. Thanks for being you.